Audio check. Okay, good morning, everyone. We're slightly delayed this morning. There's just a issue with documents that we're just working our way through. So we will. Are we there, Mr. Humphreys? Yeah. Okay, that's good. A couple of minutes late. So, procedural points this morning. We had an email yesterday from Balper. We'll look at that and respond to that. It'll probably be early next week now. So if anyone from Balper's listening over the live stream, just to say we've got that. Mr. Clark, you indicated you had some procedural issues you wanted to talk about.
Yes, thank you, Madam. We note your comments yesterday about pressure of time on Climate Change Week. We've trimmed some time from our evidence in chief and cross-examination, and we emailed that through yesterday.
Thank you.
However, you will have seen from our statement of case that a large part of our efforts in this inquiry are concerning climate change. One of our two witnesses, Professor Anderson, is joining us at the inquiry for the Climate Week, but he has a prior commitment the week after, which he can't break. It's very important to us that Professor Anderson is in attendance during the airport's evidence from Mr. Osman Ireland and during our barrister's cross-examination of him to enable her to take instructions as necessary. If that doesn't happen, we feel that we will be prejudiced.
Okay, that's noted, and I did see that in an email as well. Obviously, we need everyone to work together just to look at the timings, and I thank you for getting those back to us. That's all noted. We'll look at the programming and do our best in endeavours. And I mean, at the minute, that's all I can say. But that is noted, and we, be assured we will try our very best to get it all into that week.
I suppose one possibility would be an extension of the hours for that week. That could be a possibility, perhaps. Yeah,
we've got a lot of work to do, which we'll be looking at probably next week, just on the timetabling and scheduling. But okay, that's noted. And I think for others involved in the Climate Change Week, if you can get your timings in revised, if possible, as soon as you can to the programme officer, just to enable us to have a look at that. And we will keep parties informed as a running commentary of what's going on and the pressures involved of that week. Okay.
There is one more matter, if that's okay. So we would ask that a letter that we're about to hand around be added as an inquiry document. This letter has been handed in because Mr. Humphreys, on behalf of the airport, has mentioned on a number of occasions that our barrister, Estelle de Haan, wrote an open advice, which was emailed nearly a week before the committee meeting to local councillors, but not copied to the airport. In the first instance, we're advised that we had no obligation to provide this advice to Bristol Airport. In any event, we understand from Mr. Humphreys' cross-examination of Hilary Byrne that the airport obtained a copy of the open advice. We therefore consider they weren't prejudiced, as they could have responded if they wished. We're handing up this letter to correct any mistaken impression that we were behaving improperly. The letter shows that Bristol Airport was also writing directly to the council and therefore to councillors on the committee through their legal advisors. This letter, which I think you have in front of you, was not copied to us or to any other objectors and was delivered at such a late stage. We think it was published on the North Somerset Council website one day before the ratification meeting, that there was no time to draft a response. We also note, and we'd ask that you note, the explicit cost threat in the last paragraph. Thank you.
Okay, so I've just had handed up, it's a letter dated the 16th of March from Womble Bond Dickinson.
Correct, yeah.
Mr. Humphreys, did you have any comments to make?
Obviously, I haven't seen the letter, so it's difficult. Clearly, it's no criticism of Ms. de Haan, and actually, I've been very careful, you'll have noted in opening and all comments, never to refer to who the council is. It's obvious from the bottom of the document, but I've not personalised it. I've just made it very clear that there was an opinion that was given. The criticism is obviously that there was legal advice submitted to some councillors, so at a very late stage, which you would have expected we as the applicant, not just another party, but actually the applicant, would have had a proper opportunity to respond to. And obviously, as you will appreciate, because we weren't expecting this, it wasn't a sort of, no one was in place to respond. It's not like the inquiry now where I'm sitting here, where something comes in, you know, the client takes me out. I'm kind of not involved in that way, or you know, even when I'm sort of contacted, not within a timescale. This was a few days and a weekend, and then the meeting was on Monday. Now, what the council might have done was say, look, this has come in, this is clearly material, as Ms. Byrne said, this was intended to influence members. She was absolutely candid about this, and adjourn the meeting to allow some response or consideration to be given to this. But the in principle decision to refuse was taken. Some sample reasons for refusal were given. They were, I think officers went away and sort of honed them down over the next few days, and then there was the March meeting, and that really is the point. Now, I don't know what the letter says. I haven't seen the letter, but that's our concern. It's not a criticism of the council that wrote it. She's not responsible for what happens to the document. It's what subsequently was done with it, and our ability to take that into account that has been, you know, of frankly genuine frustration to the airport, which had been trying to negotiate and discuss and deal with things with officers for months, frankly.
Mr. Taylor, did you have any comments?
Madam, I'm not going to engage at this stage. It doesn't seem to me to be appropriate to do so. There's clearly a timeline that has to be established factually. Part of that timeline will be the extent to which Bristol Airport was aware of the opinion being circulated, and when, what their response to that was to officers and to the council, and whether they requested adjournment, and when they did that. So all of that is for later in the inquiry. I suspect when we call the planning witnesses. I'm not going to do a tit for tat now. It doesn't seem to me to be helpful to you or to the inquiry to do that this morning.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Clark.
If I could just add one more thing. Mr. Humphreys perhaps misunderstood, but the letter, the advice went to all the councillors, not a selected few of the councillors. It went to all the councillors, and it went nearly a week before the original committee hearing. So it's quite hard to establish the timeline because we weren't involved in getting, you know, we didn't get the Womble letter, for example, so I couldn't say. But the Womble letter, as I understand, was, we first heard about it one day before the confirmation hearing.
Okay. Mr. Humphreys, your fingers were on your microphone.
Yes, Ms. Byrne made it clear that it had gone to all members. We didn't actually know that. I mean, how would we know that? I think in my opening I said I think it went to, we knew it went to at least some members, because that's frankly all we know. We obviously, you know, haven't been able to discuss these things. I'm perfectly content to accept that it went to all members. I have no reason not to believe that. It doesn't change my view on things.
Okay. I think we'll go away and have a think on this. I mean, we know it's been raised. We are aware of the letter. Obviously, I've not seen this particularly. In some respects, it is a timeline, and we appreciate, related to the committee meetings back in 2020. In some respects, we're here to listen to the evidence, with fresh ears. So in that regards, I don't want to get sort of sidetracked into all this, but we'll go and have a read, and if I have any more comments to make, I'll come back, okay? All right.
Yeah, I mean, we do understand that this isn't a primary issue, but we just wanted to put it forward because we were concerned about the impression that we'd somehow behaved improperly.
Okay.
I mean, we take no further point on it. I'm not sure if others want to.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Any other procedural matters this morning before we kick off? No. Okay. So I'm assuming Mr. Piper is with us virtually. Fingers crossed.
I'm hoping that RP is for Ring and Piper.
Good morning.
Hello, and can you hear us, Mr. Piper?
I can, thank you.
Excellent. Good. Okay, well, over to you, Mr. Humphreys.
Thank you, Madam. You should have, Mr. Piper, a full proof of evidence, a rebuttal proof of evidence, and a summary proof of evidence. Mr. Piper, just so that you are aware, it may appear a lot of the time that I don't look at you. I'm not being rude. The nearest screen is down to my left. The camera that is filming me is high on the wall, sort of slightly in front of me, so forgive me if I, at times, appear to be looking away from you. If I look directly at you, I look over Mr. Taylor's left shoulder, so that I'm trying to look at the other screen.
Noted, and likewise.
Take that however you like. Mr. Piper, I'm going to introduce you first by reference to your proof of evidence, section 1.1 in the main proof. Is your name Ringen Piper?
It is, yes.
And you tell us that you're a director at BCA Insight Limited, and that's a consultancy that specializes in delivering health-related impact assessments, and you set out in your paragraph 1.1.3 your various qualifications relevant to health, and you tell us in 1.1.4 that you've been a consultant since 2005, and 1.1.5 you explain that you've co-authored the guidance on health and impact assessment for a whole series of bodies, the Faculty of Public Health England, and for the World Health Organization. And then a whole series of different documents that you've contributed to, including the IAIA and UFA, I believe it's pronounced, the European Public Health Association guidance, one of the documents we'll look at later, the United Nations Economic Commission draft guidance, Public Health England document, again, we'll look at some of the Public Health England documents, and the IEMA documents as well. And then you set out in 1.1.6 some key publications that you've been involved in producing. Mr. Piper, without meaning to be sort of immodest, are you, I mean, you're, not just a national expert, as I understand it, an international expert on health impact assessment. Is that fair?
I would say it's fair, not wanting to stay modest, but yes.
Thank you. And you led the team that produced the original environmental statement health chapter and also the environmental statement addendum, and you also tell us that you've worked on other projects. So with that by way of introduction, were you, well, we know from that you were involved in the application before determination, and did you have contact with officers and others relating to the health impact assessments?
No, I think the contact has been through the usual EIA channels, through the consultation processes and so on, and then indeed the officers have taken other public health advice, as we'll note. And
can we just, as we have with other witnesses, just look at the position as reflected in the officer's report? So do you have access to the CDs either electronically or by other means?
I do, yes.
So could you go to the officer's report, which we have as CD 4.11? And in that document, I'd get you to turn to page 130. And right at the bottom of that page, it tells us that to assess the HIA, officers consulted with Public Health England and the Council's Public Health team. Public Health England are the statutory consultees for HIAs and has the expertise to advise on its acceptability. Public Health England's comments on the application show that it considers that the HIA has been carried out in accordance with good practice, and its methodology and scope to assess the likely impacts on health and well-being is proportionate to the proposed development. As far as you understand, was there any disagreement either with Public Health England or the Council's officers or anyone else on the scope of or results of the health impact assessment, or the ES chapter of the health chapter of the environmental statement?
No, and I think this is a very important point, that there is public health consensus on what the health impact assessment is showing in terms of population health. Public Health England provided a formal consultation response. Maybe we'll look at that at some point. There's a few pointers there, but there's nothing to disagree with the results.
Now, we know from the Council's reasons for refusal and their noise and air quality evidence that they've raised some concerns about health incomes at an individual level, and this is obviously an issue we'll explore in more detail, but is that the same as a public health or a population health issue?
It's not. There is always a relationship between the individual health effects and the population health effects, and indeed in public health there is always that tension between looking at the health of the population and at individual rights and freedoms within that. But no, I'll be explaining why we take a population health approach, why that's appropriate in EIA and in planning, and how that's helpful to inspectors.
I want to move on now briefly to just legislative and policy context, and I think you've had the chance to watch some of the sessions over the last few days, perhaps not all, but you'll be aware we've obviously covered some of the policy issues. But you, in section 3.2 of your evidence, you summarize some of the main policy issues that form a context to the considerations of health. And can we just dip into a few of those documents just to pull out some of the points that relate particularly to health, as opposed perhaps to some of the things that we've been looking at in relation to noise or air quality. So let's start with the airport's policy framework. We've got that as a document called CD 6.1. And where should we go in that document? What would you like to particularly draw attention to?
I think if we could have a look at PDF page 9, which is in the exec summary, and that's paragraph 5 of the executive summary. And this is point making, it's a general point, and it's talking about aviation as a sector being a major contributor to the economy. And I think this is a very important link into public health, because a major determinant of health, a way in which development affects population health outcomes, is through the economic effects, through the jobs. So that is something that's picked up within the health impact assessment.
So we can note that one, and then take you to perhaps page 59. Sorry, not 59.
57.
57, I think, yep. And paragraph 3.12, we have looked at this before, but again, what role does this play?
Yes, we've been over this, so I won't dwell on it too long, but I think what we must take away from this is that we're talking about limiting and, where possible, reducing the number of people to significant adverse effects of noise. And so we're not talking in absolute terms. We're not talking about avoiding significant effects to every individual. And I think this speaks to the population health approach, and indeed that a threshold can't be a threshold for everyone.
And then again, keeping on the health theme, there are many other relevant parts of the document, but trying to keep on the health theme, paragraph 3.34, PDF page 62, which is talking about night noise. Just get your comments on that.
Yes, I think this helps to understand the focus of the health impact assessment, particularly in the noise assessment. There's clearly a lot we could talk about, and the policy direction is very much that we focus on the night noise effects, particularly around sleep disturbance.
And we'll obviously come to the actual health impact assessment later and what you've done, but did you have regard to this, and indeed obviously other guidance, when making your judgments in the health impact assessment?
Indeed, absolutely.
Okay, let's just touch on then another document, the NPPF, which we've got as CD 5.8. And that's so we're looking at the original, I think, 2019 version, so the paragraph numbers are the same, so I'll take you to those as we've got that document, and I'll just give the inspectors the other paragraph numbers. So paragraph 90, in that document, which is PDF. No, that's, it must be, is it page 90?
I think it's original paragraph 91.
Sorry, I've mistakenly opened the new version of the PDF. I was completely throwing myself there.
The new version is on the core documents now. Is it easier to go
yes,
to that one?
What number is that now?
Let me just go back.
So it is 5.8.1.
It's 5.8.1. So CD 5.8 is the old one, the 2019 version, and 5.8.1 is the new one. So
I think I've got it as 581. I think I'd created it from, downloading it from the government website and giving it that number before anyone else had. So, right, let's look at the updated one and look at paragraph 91. Sorry, I think it's now paragraph 92. Is that right? Yes, now paragraph 92.
You learn them all and then they change them, I think, just to keep them.
Exactly. I still actually go back to the 1971 Town and Country Planning Act to just find Section 52 agreements much easier. Never really, had anything to do with this Section 106 stuff. It's just all too modern. So paragraph 91, paragraph 92. I think my problem with numbers is not good either. Paragraph 92. Planning policies and decisions should aim to achieve healthy, inclusive places. So, again, we can see that, but just your comment on it and the role that plays.
Yes, I think there's two important points here. One is that this is an opportunity to look across the assessment, and the health impact assessment really is the opportunity to look at whether we are having a healthy, inclusive and safe place, and that is what the health impact assessment confirms. I think it's also important to sort of note this paragraph as an anchor, because there is specific planning practice guidance on healthy and safe communities, which clearly has a direct read across to this. And I think it was a point made by Mr. Fumicelli that it doesn't say in the NPPF that you should take a population health approach. Well, actually, if we go to the planning practice guidance, it's quite implicit that you do so. So we can have a look at that a little later, but that's just to note that this is the anchor for that point.
Thank you. Well, we'll make sure that we do that. And then in this document, the NPPF, paragraph 185, which I think is in this document, PDF page 53.
Yes, again, we're talking about development being appropriate for its location, and particularly looking at the effects of pollution on health. And again, this is very much what the health impact assessment is doing, and it's helping to provide that understanding on the same methodology, looking across all the different ways that health is affected of what is the population health effect.
So can we now look at the, and again, we've touched on this before, the noise policy statement for England, that's CD 10.4, and again, perhaps try not to go over some of the sections that we've looked at, particularly in the noise topic, but just focus on some of the wider points. So where should we go in this document?
Briefly, I'd just like to touch on a few paragraphs. So PDF page 6, and that's paragraph 2.1. I think it's important that acknowledges that noise is an inevitable consequence. Then lower down on the same page at paragraph 2.7, we're reminded not to consider noise in isolation, and that perhaps some previous decisions didn't give enough weight to that context around noise and the wider development benefits. If we turn the page to PDF page 7, paragraph 2.9, then we note that noise is about physical characteristics. We've heard quite a lot about that, but also the human reaction to it, and that's very much where the health impact assessment assists. And perhaps we spoke about context. If we briefly flip back to PDF page 4, that's where that context is explained. It's paragraph 1.8, or the box under it, which is the sustainable development guiding principles. And in there we have meeting the diverse needs of all people, and prosperity and opportunity for all in terms of the economic benefits. So again, we're reminded that we're looking at the overall effects of the development on opportunities for people and diverse needs, and that's again very much what the health impact assessment is helping to present and understand.
Fine, and now let's look at one of the aviation documents, Beyond the Horizon, so CD 6.3. And again, focus on, these are all documents we've touched on in different contexts, but just focus on for the inspector some of the health points that it may be helpful to pull out.
So PDF page 36, paragraph 4.6. Again, we emphasize here the crucial role to the wider economy. And again, this is a very important determinant of health, a very big influence on
I think
health.
that's actually PDF page 38, paragraph 4.6, if that's the paragraph number.
Oh, my apologies. Paragraph 4.6.
Yep, so that's for the inspector's PDF, page 38. I do apologise. It's 36 in the actual document, but 38 in the PDF. Sorry, Mr. Piper, I do apologise.
No, well, my PDF numbers may have got out of sync then, so I apologise. The next one is paragraph 6.4, which is on actual page 57. And the message here is looking at the development very much in terms of balance and sustainable development and mitigating negative impacts. And indeed, again, that is exactly the position. Actual page 63, paragraph 6.25. I think this will be the last one.
PDF page 65, I think that will be.
And I think we've looked at this before, but it's just noting that there's an allowance for airport growth. It's about communities sharing in the economic benefits. So if we come to discussing sharing in more detail later, we'll remember that it's quite clear here we're talking about economic benefits. I'm sure there are others as well, and mitigating where possible. And I think further down the paragraph there's a few terms just to pull out: a proportionate approach, a suitable frameworks, and appropriate role for the aviation sector. So none of this is framed in absolutes. It's about taking a judgment and considering the context, which again is very much what the health impact assessment is providing. And that's all the policy I would like to look at.
And I want to turn on now just to identify some of the sources of good practice when one's looking at health impact assessment. So we'll come on later and look at what has been done in the ES and the ESA, but let's just identify first where public health practitioners, what do they look to in order to carry out assessment. And I think the first document we need to look at, and I think I know now what the numbers are, so CD 20.65, which is a document is referred to in your proof of evidence, but that's the CD number that it's now been given. So could we look at that, 20.65? And this is the document entitled Human Health Ensuring a High Level of Protection. It's the IAIA UFA document published last year. And I think it's because of its subtitle, which you can see on the front page, which is a reference paper on addressing human health in environmental impact assessment. It's sometimes referred to, I think, as the reference paper. Is that right?
That's correct. Sorry for the complex acronyms there.
Don't worry at all. So we'll go later into what the reference paper tells us, but can we just start by establishing the, if you like, the status of the reference paper? What is it? How's it been pulled together?
Yes, so this is a very important document for how we look at health in EIA, and this is really the consensus position by both the public health community and the impact assessment community, and this resolves a lot of uncertainty perhaps as to what health in EIA was meant to do. We recall that it's only in 2017 that the EIA regulations explicitly clarified that health was part of the scope, and this is the document that really sets out in detail what that means. And if we turn to PDF page 3, there is box 1-2.
I think that's actual page 3, PDF page 11.
Oh, my apologies, PDF page 11. And this really just confirms the status of it. This is a document that has been very widely consulted on. It was subject of a World Health Organization technical meeting. It was discussed at the UFA, the European Public Health Association conference. It's been peer reviewed. It's cited in the academic literature. This is, a really robust consensus position statement on both the coverage of health in EIA and indeed the methods that one might use to reach one's conclusions.
And you told us in paragraph 1.1.5 of your proof of evidence you were one of the co-authors, I think, of the document. Is that right?
That's correct. So whilst this is a relatively new publication, it's something that's been working on in the background for quite some years, and indeed, therefore, the methods used for this ES and ESA fully align with what we were working on here as an international consensus position.
And then there's another document which I think has now got the number CD 20.66, which is a Public Health England document, which is actually published a couple of months before the UEFA document, but refers to the UEFA document. And you said a moment ago, UEFA, there's been a process that has been gone through. Is the Public Health England guidance, which we'll come to in a moment, is that consistent with UEFA?
Exactly. So, and I advised on the Public Health England one as well, and Public Health England were very keen that the UFA IAIA document be clearly referenced within their publication, and we can go on to look at that.
Let's look at that then. So that's now got the number CD 20.66. It's Public Health England Health Impact Assessment in Spatial Planning, a guide for local authority public health and planning teams. And again, we're just at this stage understanding the status of these documents, which are a framework for carrying out health impact assessment. So where should we go in this document?
I think there's 2 points I'd just like you to look at. One, the first is Table 1 on PDF page 10. And in both these cases, the reason I'm taking you to these is just to establish that the UK guidance on health impact assessment has very clearly linked itself to that reference paper.
So is that Table 1 on PDF page 10?
That's correct, yes. So the bottom row of that, well, indeed, the title is Existing Health Impact Assessment Guidance in the UK. And the bottom row relates to where the assessment is sort of integrated with other assessments such as EIA, and you can see that the reference number 20 there is the addressing human health in EIA by IAIA and UFA. So that is the reference paper. And similarly, and even more clearly perhaps, if we go to PDF page 32, and paragraph 6.7, then this describes how HIA, health impact assessment, can be integrated into EIA, and it explicitly says for further guidance, go to addressing human health in EIA by IAIA and UFA, reference 20 again. So it is clearly placing that guidance with some status in England in terms of health impact assessment.
And you know, as we can see from these documents, the Public Health England one October 2020, the UEFA one December 2020, post-date the environmental statement and the environmental statement addendum, but you worked on both of those later documents. To what extent is the health impact assessment that you have undertaken consistent with the guidance?
It is consistent. You'll see, of course, it's not identical. The reference paper goes into a great deal more detail, and the ES provides a perhaps more summary methods position, but it is completely consistent. Okay,
and in your, we can see in your proof of evidence, probably no need to look it up, but in your proof of evidence in paragraph 3.3.4, you reference various other national and international literature on this, on guidance and good practice. So is the process that you have undertaken one that conforms to good practice guidance, you know, at international and indeed national level?
Absolutely. I mean, there's no question that the EIA assessment is done to a very high standard in relation to good practice.
And then in your proof, there's a section 4.2, framing conclusion on health in EIA. And I want to talk about some of the concepts in that section, but perhaps just start with what we mean by health. What's health for these purposes?
Yes, so we take the World Health Organization definition of health as a state of complete physical, mental and social well-being, not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. And I think it's important to recognise that health is a very emotive topic. It's a very serious topic. You know, we're talking about people's health. We're talking about the health of the population. So I think there is, you know, considerable responsibility in making these judgments, and public health is the part of our system that looks at health in the planning context, and that takes a population health approach to it. And public health is very much looking at the population level. It looks at the whole system. It's not not just specific diseases and curing specific diseases in individuals, perhaps more the clinical medical profession. It is looking at the whole system. How do we ensure that our population is healthy?
And in your paragraph 4.2.6, you make a point in reference to population versus individual health. Could you, I mean, we can all read what you said, 4.2.6, but could you just explain to the inspectors the significance of that particular point?
Yes, and I think, and for summary, that is a point that we absolutely are not trying to downplay or deny, that there may be a small proportion of people on any development who may experience adverse health outcomes. And you know, this is a challenge. This is a challenge for society. It's a challenge for all planning decisions, and it is, of course, should be weighed up duly. But also, we must also weigh up duly whether we're not just putting a small number of individuals at risk, but whether we're putting the population at risk, and that, in terms of EIA, in terms of planning, is very much where the health assessment is coming from. So I'm sure we'll talk about some of the individual level effects at some point today, but you know, great compassion for that. But this is a technical assessment that's looking at the population health effect, and that is the appropriate framing for the assessment, and an assessment that provides useful information to the inspectors in weighing up the balance.
And I want to just sort of take up that theme that it's right to look at public health, population level health, and perhaps by reference again to the reference paper, CD 20.65. Could we go back to that document? And we've established its status, so could you just take us through that document and identifying why it is that it's public health, population health, rather than individual health that is the appropriate thing to be examining in terms of health impact assessment and EIA?
Yes, so if I take you to PDF page 34, and that's
PDF
paragraph,
page 42, I think. 65.
It's paragraph 7.2.17. Sorry, PDF page 42, yes. Sorry. So, paragraph 7.2.17, and this is a very important paragraph because this is a definitive statement, which perhaps a little scarce, but health in EIA takes a population health approach. It's very clear. That is a consensus statement by public health and by impact assessment.
And then the two bullet points there, can you just explain those? Because that will become relevant when we talk later about the populations that you looked at in the HIA for this particular project.
Absolutely. So within a population, we have to think about the very important issue of health inequalities, and that's whether there are differences within the population in terms of the exposures or the health outcomes. So to do that, we look at reaching two conclusions on each of our effects, one for the general population and one for vulnerable groups as a subpopulation. So it's looking at those people who might have particular sensitivities on an issue, and being very clear that there might be greater impact to that small proportion of people, and we look at it specifically, and we therefore gives us an opportunity to target mitigation to reduce health inequalities.
And then can I get you to go to PDF page 84, table C2.
Yes.
And there you've got some terms to define magnitude. The table actually goes on to the next page. So it's PDF page 84.
Yes, I think if we look at the population extent row, which is on page 84, then this provides a bit of additional clarification, and towards the bottom of that, it explains that where effects are best characterized as only affecting a few individuals, then these are very much effects that we ought to be targeting mitigation at and discussing, absolutely. But in EIA and public health terms, these aren't necessarily population health effects.
Madam, did you find that reference? It's on PDF page 85. It's the sort of third box from the end of that table.
It's quite a long paragraph.
It is.
Yeah.
It's the very last two sentences in that population extent box, I think, that Mr. Piper was drawing attention to.
And perhaps while we're on this table, to save having to pop back to it later, we might also just note the box above on severity on the same page, and in the middle of that there is a sentence that explains that whilst there isn't a sort of rigid hierarchy in terms of health outcomes, one tends to put outcomes such as mortality towards the top, and those like quality of life towards the bottom. And we might talk a little more later about the relative change in risks that you experience with a change in environmental conditions. And again, this is very much a document that helps to provide additional guidance on that.
So we're still looking at this concept of why you look at and why it's appropriate to look at population health rather than individual health in HIA, EIA terms. We've looked at UEFA. Can we just then pick up the same theme in the Public Health England document, so CD 20.67? And here I think we need PDF page 23. No, that.
I think CD 20.66.
Yes. Yes, sorry. Yes, sorry. With the CD numbers changing, I've got the wrong CD number. Madam, I do apologise. I try and make a note for myself of where I want to go in the documents, and the note obviously hasn't caught up with the change in numbers a few moments ago. Sorry, yes, in that document, can we go to, I think it's PDF page 23. Yes, in paragraph 3.10. So this is a section that's identify health impacts and their potential significance. This is the Public Health England document, and again, we're on this theme of population or public health, and just explain to us the importance of this paragraph.
Yes, so again, thinking about, we're taking a population health approach. If we look at the middle of paragraph 3.10, it explains that significance is determined in relation to specific population characteristics. So again, we're very clearly anchoring to populations, and table 5 immediately below that paragraph is a sort of significance matrix. It focuses really on sort of the magnitude elements of significance. It's very much aligned with the UFA reference paper, and the bottom 2 rows, which are in bold as not significant effects. These are indicative. I think we have to say, you look at all of them, you weigh it up. It's not a cut and dry, but indicatively, we've got for not significant under sort of slight effects, a small minority of the population affected, and on neutral effects, we've got very few people affected. So again, both are pointing us towards needing a sizable proportion of the population to be affected before we're moving up into those significant effects.
And we
I think
see with the higher categories, moderate is large minority of population affected, and major, whether adverse or beneficial, is majority of population affected.
Exactly. And as we took a moment with the other table to look at severity, I think that's helpful here as well, just to note that the lines immediately before those population health statements also talk about where for slight effects, where severity is predominantly related to a minor change in morbidity. So that's very much the case we're talking about with air quality and noise in this case. And in the neutral effects, where severity predominantly relates to a minor change in quality of life. So again, we're quite clearly in the indicatively not significant categories against the Public Health England guidance.
And if we just go on to PDF page 34, I hope, section 7, paragraph 7.1.
Yes, again, we're maybe more than the previous one. We're emphasising here in the second sentence of that first paragraph that embedding health in the planning system is an opportunity to improve population health outcomes. Very much it's about population.
And earlier, when we were looking at the MPPF and a reference to health, you said, well, actually this gets taken up in the planning practice guidance. So we've got the health part of the planning practice guidance now as CD 20.67. 20.67. So where should we go in that document to pick up this theme of population or public health?
Yes, I think it's page 2 of that. So that's PDF
20.67, we've now got it.
So I think page 2, I hope. So the title at the top, how can positive planning contribute to healthier communities? And let's just recall that we were thinking about PPF, paragraph 92, with healthy and safe places, and this is the planning practice guidance on healthy and safe communities. So it's clear read across. And if we scroll to about halfway down that page, there's a title, what are the main health organisations, and the second paragraph under that explains that the first point of contact for population health issues is the Director of Public Health. So again, we're this whole section of planning practice guidance is in relation to population health and directing to speak with public health.
If we go on to page 4 in the PDF, we can see the theme. Again, on page 4, there's a heading, how can the need for health facilities and other health and wellbeing impacts be considered in the planning policies and decisions?
Yes, and again, perhaps an even more definitive statement here. The second paragraph under that heading, it talks about it's helpful for the Director of Public Health to be consulted on planning applications that are likely to have significant impacts on health of the local population. So, I mean, this is absolutely health in EIA territory, and this is very clearly making the links between the planning practice guidance, the NPPF, and taking a public health, population health approach.
So we've identified the status of the important documents to look at in relation to public health. We've then moved on and we've looked at why it is one looks at public or population health as part of HIA and EIA. What I'd like to do next is just turn to significance, how within that framework of documents that we've identified and looking at public and population health, how do we decide what is significant in public health terms and not significant in public health terms? And I think some of the language here, although we've obviously left the European Union, I think some of the language is a sort of legacy from previous, our previous previously being part of the European Union. So can you just again just talk us through how significance is looked at, and then we can look at some of the current guidance. So just give us a little bit of the historic perspective.
Yeah, so I think this is a very important point about what we mean by the term and what the health impact assessment means, and indeed what all of EIA and planning means is a very technical usage of the term significance. Yes, it goes back to the EIA directive, and indeed the European Commission provided guidance on that. And at my proof of evidence, page 48, I provide an extract from European Commission guidance. It's their guidance on EIA scoping, where they very helpfully provide a general definition of significance for EIA. And they're clear in that it's talking about what is important, what is desirable, what is acceptable, and they relate it very much to context-specific judgments. Now that's a broad definition for all of EIA. There's then the question of what does that mean specifically for health, and this is something where the UFA reference paper very much provides us with a very clear steer.
So, having looked at sort of historically where this came from, if we go back to the reference paper, which, as we know, is then reflected as good practice in the Public Health England document, can we go back to CD 20.65 again? And I think that we need to go to PDF page 27. And there's a section there, what is a significant effect for human health in EIA? Perhaps you just talk us through that. The inspectors obviously can read it. I think paragraph 516 is a helpful introduction to the topic, but just talk us through a little bit what the reference paper tells us about this.
Yes, so again, the reference paper picks up on that European Commission definition. We're looking at importance, we're looking at desirability and acceptability. And it's noted in the paragraph below that this is distinct, this is different from statistical significance. That might come into it in perhaps some of the literature and the relationships we look at health outcomes, but your EIA conclusion on significance is about a professional judgment. It's about evidence. It's drawing on different sources of evidence in order to understand importance and acceptability, particularly. And the reference paper goes on. There's a further section on PDF page, I think it's 41. And at paragraph 7.2.14, it explains that common approaches relate to an analysis of multiple criteria. So EIA were very familiar with sensitivity and magnitude, and those certainly are related. And the guidance, the reference paper goes into great detail on what each of sensitivity and magnitude mean in terms of health. It also relates it to the context, and there it lists a whole series of supporting evidence sources, which are the bullet points on paragraph 7.2.15, the scientific literature, baseline, policy, priorities, regulation, and that provides you with further understanding and depth to your reasoned conclusion as to what the significant effects of a project are likely to be. And it very much encourages a narrative approach to explaining that.
And we can see there in paragraph 7.2.15 the reference to Appendix C, and also in that little kind of box next door with the little person jumping between two things. And I'm not suggesting we study it in detail, but if we go to Appendix C, which is, I think you can press the hyperlink and get there, it's PDF page 80. We see Appendix C analysing multiple criteria to establish significance in EIA, and there's, I think when I looked at it before, about 10 pages of boxes and criteria. Indeed, we looked previously at table C2 on PDF page 84, 85, where we highlighted some text. And is that part of this very detailed matrix of how you frame professional judgments on significance?
Exactly, and I would love for everyone who does health and impact assessment to be looking at this appendix and reading it in detail. We're not going to do that now, of course, but this provides a structured framework that explains exactly, transparently, how you get to your conclusions on significance. I think there's been criticisms in the field for a long time that it's something of a black box, and this very much seeks to open that. It's still a professional judgment, but there are models there, that there's criteria, and there's prompts. So, and that very much flows through into the methods that have been used in the ES, and it shows, you know, the real robustness, the basis on which the conclusions regarding significance have been reached.
And we know, obviously, in this case, the inspectors in EIA, HIA terms are looking at the effect of the proposed development, which, you know, for shorthand I can characterize as the 10 MPPA airport in 2030 on the core case versus the 12 MPPA airport in 2030. Can we, in terms of the health chapter of the ES, the HIA, can we just look at that to see how you have taken these concepts and then sort of applied them at the project level here? So I think we need CD 2.5.42, human health, and go first to PDF page 25. You can see about halfway down that page, you introduce table 16.7, and then in the next paragraph you introduce table 16.8. Can you just take us to those tables, which are on sensitivity and characterizing magnitude, first of all? Explain what they are and how they fit within the framework we've been discussing.
Yes, so this is a bit more of a summary of the methods. You know, we're constrained in how much we can put into an EIA. Health is a very broad topic. We would love to have hundreds of pages to explain what we do, but here we have some summary tables that explain very much what the Appendix C of the UFA reference paper is presenting. So for sensitivity, table 16.7, we're looking at various characteristics within that, looking at issues of inequalities, of deprivation, of health status, life stage, and people's outlook. We're giving indicative sort of prompts as to where that might fall on a sort of high to low sensitivity. We do the same for magnitude. It's table 16.8 immediately below, and again some prompts for sort of higher or lower magnitude in relation to severity, the population extent affected, frequency, reversibility, and exposure. And not every criteria will be relevant in every case. The aim is very much to give a consistent methodology that can apply across every determinant of health. So today we're focusing on air quality, noise, and socioeconomics, but of course this is a method that can span transport and community identity and many other health determinants. Going on to the final table on the following page, table 16.9. This is picking up on those contextual factors that we noted in the reference paper. So we'll see the scientific literature, the baseline conditions, local health priorities, consultation, regulation, and policy. So all these help to frame the judgment within the context of the specific area and local conditions.
And we see those, as you say, the headings in the table: scientific literature, baseline conditions, health priorities, and so on. And although this document predated the UFA document, in the UFA document, and you took us to it a few minutes ago, in the UFA document, no need to look it up, I'll just give the reference, CD 20.65, paragraph 7.2.15, which is where we press the hyperlink to Appendix C. In that paragraph, there was a list of contextual considerations which are exactly the same headings as in your table, at table 16.9.
Exactly. There's a very clear read across between the two. I think, what we're trying to show here is of course that the ES methods stand on their own merits, but if you have any doubt, then the recent publications show that this is absolutely best practice. This is absolutely robust, and this is completely reasonable approach to take in determining significance for population health in EIA.
So, with that context, then, can we look at the health impact assessment results? So we need to go back to, I suppose stay with the document we've been looking at, 2.5.42. We need to note that this is in the ES rather than the ES addendum, because the ES addendum in effect was a sort of an update and slightly less full in its descriptions. So if we start by looking at, when we were looking at the reference document, we talked about different populations. You remember I asked you to look at general population and vulnerable population. So can we just look at the ES, I think it's PDF page 9 now, to understand. So PDF page 9, section 16.4, study area, and paragraph 16.4.2. And just again, explain to the inspectors, as the context for the assessment, what were the population groups that you looked at?
Yes, so we have two groupings. So this first grouping is populations in terms of geographical, and we have 4 population groups, which are the bullet points under 16.4.2. So the population near Bristol Airport, this is termed site-specific population, and this is the really zooming in small area population, the immediate population around the airport. I think, probably the one we'll focus on most. This is related to the relevant lower superate output areas that are in the immediate vicinity of the airport. That is done by way of choosing indicative ones in terms of health. It's not trying to map the limits of effects, because effects, particularly mental health effects, often go further than boundaries of impacts, but we look at the population in terms of its indicative sensitivity and it's the immediate surroundings. We then have another wider area, which is the North Somerset Unitary Authority, so that's the local context to the development. We then have the regional in southwest England and southeast Wales, and then the national and international population. So we've got 4 geographic levels there.
And when we're in the reference document, we were told you look at geographical things, but you also have to look at vulnerable groups. Can you just take us to where the ES does that?
So, paragraph 16.7.7.
Yeah, I think PDF page 18. PDF page 18, population scope, and there's a reference there, first subheading, geographical population scope, which just refers back to the text you've just taken us to, and then potentially vulnerable groups. Just again, explain to the inspectors
Yes, so
how that's used.
So these are 4 groups that are not in terms of geography, but they're in terms of characteristics which might make you more vulnerable to specific changes. And again, they're designed to work across all determinants of health, and that helps feed into sort of cumulative assessments. And so our first category is children and young people, who may be sensitive for a range of reasons, older people, and then people with existing poor health, and of course we're thinking about physical and mental health, and then people living in deprivation, including those on low income. So all groups which might experience worse health outcomes than the general population, and therefore we specifically define and look at them in each assessment. And
so what I want to do now is just look at, for the 3 main health factors that we've looked at, so air quality, noise, operational noise, and socioeconomics. You in fact looked at other things, but for those 3 main ones, can we just take the inspectors to where those are considered and where they can find the conclusion? So I think PDF 37 takes us to section 1611, predicted effects and their significance, and that's dealing with operational stage assessment of health effects, and the first subheading under that, air quality. And you can see in the paragraphs 16.11.1 onwards, you cross-refer to the, in this case, the air quality chapter of the ES and the data that you looked at there in order to carry out the assessment, and we get then to, on PDF page 39, 16.11.11, and that's your conclusion. So we don't need to go all the way through it of how you got there, but just perhaps explain to us what the conclusion was, therefore, for air quality, having taken into account the air quality information in the chapter of, again, this is the ES.
Yes, so we've looked at everything the air quality chapter has said. We've thought about the main health outcomes. We've thought about the population groups. We've looked at magnitude and sensitivity, and then the contextual considerations. And it's worth noting that there are some extensive appendices that support the main chapter, setting out a lot of that evidence in detail. And for air quality, having considered all that again within the methods, the finding is a negligible effect for the general population and a minor adverse effect, it's not significant in EIA terms, population health terms, for vulnerable groups. And that's very much taking into account the potential non-threshold health effects that Dr. Greenfield has talked about, and it's an acknowledgement of an incremental effect. You know, it's not saying everything is negligible. It's well within relevant statutory limits, but it is noting a minor adverse effect, and that's a completely reasonable public health population level reflection of what is likely to occur in terms of those exposures to people's health.
And then we can see just immediately below that conclusion the heading for noise and vibration, and again we're talking about operational noise, and again same process. The following paragraphs identify the relevant chapter of the ES where you took the data, and if we get to 6.11.22, again you get to your conclusion on significance in terms of public health, and again you may wish to just comment on that.
Yes, so again, very much we look at the noise and vibration chapter, have a good regard to everything it's saying. We think about the key health outcomes, the relevant population groups. We consider magnitude. We pull through those particularly relevant metrics that are going to explain what the health effect at a population level is likely to be. And then we look at the contextual factors, including standards, and the scientific evidence, of course, and we reach our conclusion, and that conclusion is that for the general population that there is a negligible effect, and for vulnerable groups there is a minor adverse population health effect, and again we're looking at that in terms of there being a very small change in risk factors for a small minority of the population in terms of.
And we can see at the bottom of that paragraph, you look at those risk factors in relation to sleep disturbance, cardiovascular outcomes, and learning outcomes.
Exactly. So we noted that the focus, quite rightly, should be around sleep disturbance, and that's what the chapter reflects. We can perhaps talk about cardiovascular outcomes a little more, but yes, we've looked across a range, and indeed we've also considered the daytime and the immunity effects, but quite rightly the focus is on the nighttime effects in terms of the public health exposure issues.
And then at PDF page 44, you look at economic effects, and that starts at paragraph 16.11.34, and again you draw on the relevant chapters and appendices from other parts of the environmental statement, and the conclusion there is at paragraph 16.11.43. That's on PDF page 46. And again, very briefly, if you just give us the conclusion there.
Yes, so we've looked at the socioeconomics chapter. We've looked at determinants of health. We note that jobs, income, very, very important determinants of health, often quite transformational if you're in a unemployed or low income situation, in terms of improving living conditions and making healthier choices, and being facilitated in doing so. So very strong links to very positive health outcomes. Looked at the population groups. We've considered the long-term effects of long-term employment and reducing poverty and addressing inequalities, and that feeds through. We conclude a minor positive effect for the general population and a moderate beneficial effect for vulnerable groups. And again, we're thinking particularly about those where there would be particular benefits from good long-term employment, and that's a very public health terms. It goes a long way. We're contrasting this with some of the incremental changes in risk factors. The employment benefits can go a long way in public health terms.
All of that's in the ES, and the overall conclusion was on PDF page 54. I'll just draw attention to the summary table there starting on page 54, but I don't think we need to go through that again. That was all in the ES. Obviously there's the ES addendum. Madam, if I can just sort of address you for a moment. In the ES addendum, there were a number of pages that sort of said, look, we've done the same thing again. Is there a change to the assessment? No, there isn't. Rather than going to it, could I just give you the references so that you can look at it? I hope that would be acceptable. So the ESA, the document, it would be chapter 9, and it's document CD2.20.1. 6.1, and in broad terms, the relevant bits that update are between pages, PDF pages 132 and 136, and you can read that. I hope it's helpful just so that you can do that, but it saves a little bit of time. Mr. Piper, you mention in your proof you've obviously looked at sensitivity testing in terms of faster and slower growth. Does that make any material difference to your conclusions?
No.
No. And the inspectors, I think, have seen before what the Stansted inspectors made of this issue. Again, I'll just give the reference rather than taking us to it. It was CD 6.13, PDF page 6. There's no need for us to look at it. We have looked at it before. And were your conclusions in the ES ones that were accepted by the officers in the officers' report?
They were, yes. And we could look at CD 411. And I think it's PDF page 135. And the second paragraph there under conclusion, the health impact assessment is realistic. There are no overriding health or well-being impacts that would warrant refusal of the application, albeit contingent on mitigation being appropriately conditioned, of course.
And
I think
perhaps if we go on to PDF page 146 as well, and see what Public Health England thought.
Yes, so again, the second paragraph, and it explains that public health and well-being have been considered in consultation with Public Health England, and it is concluded that the proposals do not give rise to any additional impacts that require mitigation. So again, we're concluding with public health consensus on the conclusions of the health impact assessment.
Just finally, I think we've got about 10 minutes before my time runs out. I just want to touch on a few of the things that you deal with in your rebuttal. So one of the points that Mr. Fumicelli made in his proof of evidence related to cardiovascular impacts. He dealt with that in his proof of evidence at paragraph 4.41 and following, and then your rebuttal looked at that at paragraph 2.1.8 and following. Just very briefly for the inspectors, could you just explain the point about cardiovascular impacts? Because as you said earlier, health can be quite an emotive issue, but as well as looking at consequence, whether it's a cardiovascular event or morbidity or whatever it is, it's also important to understand risk, i.e. the likelihood of that type of thing happening. Could you just explain to the inspectors your position in relation to these types of events?
Yes, and it might be helpful to do it with reference to some documents. So the World Health Organization nighttime noise guidance, which is CD 10.34.
I think we've got it as 3.4 and 4.4. It's, I think, Madam, one of those duplicate things.
Just to add to the fun.
Yeah, so this is where we go free form, and you can go wherever you like. You can go 10.34 or 4.4, wherever you've got it. I think I've got 4.4. So where should we go in that document?
If we look at the executive summary, page 16, which is in the Roman numerals XVI.
So that PDF, page 18.
Then this is a page which has a figure at the top, which I think we've looked at before, and there's one particularly steep line on it, labelled infrax, which is a myocardial infarction, which is heart attack. And at the bottom of the page, there's the statement, again, I think Mr. Fiumicelli took us to this, is that above 55 dB, the cardiovascular effects become the major sort of public health concern. And I think a really important point here is that that relates to the circumstances where you've got a whole population at that noise level. And elsewhere in the document, it explains in terms of setting the 57 dB limit that this is where you would get increasing numbers, high frequencies of effects within a population. This isn't the circumstances we have. We don't have a whole population at 55 dB. So we're not talking about widespread, frequent effects. And I think if we can, for further context,
just what do you mean by, when you say we haven't got a whole population, what do you mean by a whole population?
So we have got, as we say, our sort of site-specific population, we've got our local population, we've got the people around the airport, and within those we have a relatively small number who are above the SOL, and that is not the same as saying everybody for miles around is at that level. So if we look in terms of what we're talking about in terms of the risk, I think it's helpfully done in CD 10.28, which is the WHO's 2018 environmental noise guidance. And that's page 61.
Is that PDF page 81, I think? I think, Madam, page 61 is, I think, PDF page 81.
Yeah.
That is correct. Yes. So if we look at table 26, which is halfway down the page, our first two rows there, one is labelled IHD for ischemic heart disease, which is also coronary heart disease, which is a leading cause of the myocardial infarction. And below that, we've also got hypertension. But looking at the IHD to start with, it explains that there is an RR, a relative risk of 1.09. And just for a little context there, if it's 1.0, then there's no effect. So we're looking at the number after the 1 to tell us the degree of effect. And this is that's a small effect. And that's per 10 dB. So again, we have nothing like a 10 dB increase. And we don't have a population exposed, a whole population or a majority of a population exposed to that level. So in public health terms, this is not a big significant effect. And we might also note while we're there in the final column, this is very low quality evidence rating. And we go to row below on incidence of hypertension. And in that case, there is no study that finds a significant effect that they've looked at. So that RR score would have been 1. There's no effect that they can identify that's significant. And that's a low quality evidence again. So I think health is a motive. We also need to be clear that we are talking about very small changes in risk factors to a very small minority of the population, and in public health terms, this isn't something that we put a lot of weight in planning terms to say we shouldn't be doing this. You know, we note it, we contextualize it, but we have to put this in context.
And the final issue I just want to get you to comment on is, which was raised, and you mentioned it before by Dr. Broomfield, in air quality terms, non-threshold effects. And you know, we examined with Dr. Broomfield and indeed Mr. Pearce yesterday the assessment that has been undertaken of air quality below the air quality standard or air quality objective thresholds. And again, can you just talk us through how we should regard those non-threshold effects, i.e. below threshold effects in public health terms?
Yes, so we've got sort of 3 levels really. We've got the UK statutory air quality standards, which is a clearly defined level of acceptability in the UK. We've got WHO guide values, which are lower, and then we have got non-threshold effects that fall even below those. So even the WHO guide values are not complete protection. The WHO guide values, I think worth very briefly just saying what they are and what they aren't, and you know, this is an important point that maybe goes across air quality and noise. So the WHO, of course, you know, very important. You know, these good values are a beacon and something we all aspire to, but these are values that are based solely on the scientific literature, and they don't take into account, as the judgments within a UK jurisdiction in terms of regulation has to, technical feasibility, the economic, social and political aspects of delivering those changes. And if, for example, we decided tomorrow to adopt WHO's most stringent PM 2.5 guide values, that would be a great victory, I'm sure, for air quality. But the public health ramifications across transport, across access to health, to goods, there would be serious consequences and major adverse effects. So we work towards these, and we absolutely acknowledge that there are non-threshold effects identified in the scientific literature, but we have public health protection thresholds set for very good reason, and we want public confidence in those levels. I'm sure, I don't know, Public Health England were monitoring the live feed, but the comments yesterday that perhaps Public Health England are not experienced enough to point out that PM 2.5 levels should be of concern. Public Health England are some of the best experts on this. They look at planning applications all the time. I can say with certainly from my point of view, a great degree of certainty that the reason it wasn't gone into in great detail is they're just so, PM 2.5 levels are just so far within the statutory levels that isn't the focus. The focus was the NO2 where it's perhaps a little closer to the thresholds, and that is quite rightly where the public health focus should be. So no, I think we should emphasise that the air quality levels are within statutory levels. Those are safe levels.
Mr. Piper, thank you very much, Madam. We've gone 2 or 3 minutes over. Apologies, but those were all my questions.
Thank you. I've got 2 questions that I'll ask now, and then we'll have a break. Okay. And I'm putting my local resident hat on again. It was one of the PCAA noise witnesses, and I hope they forgive me if they're watching, I can't quite remember who, terrible with names. And it's a point about mental health effects. So we had one person, a gentleman, describe his sort of overall demeanour as being scratchy and grumpy. And I just wonder how your assessments take into account of mental health effects. Obviously, we've talked about sleep disturbance and physical effects, but there's the mental health side as well.
Absolutely, and hugely important. And I think this is where the assessment, clearly, when we talk about health, we mean both physical, mental health, and well-being. It's one continuum. It's all wrapped up together. So very much the assessment conclusions reflect that. There are adverse responses to aircraft noise. I think that's well documented. I mean, we could go to the recent sonar report if you like. I don't want to draw this out too long, but there it explains. It looks at some of those associations and it finds significant associations between, for example, aircraft noise and sleep disturbance. But then when you go down to look at the health aspects of that, there aren't significant effects between either the health effects or the mental health effects of the aircraft noise and the health and well-being outcomes. So I think there's certainly links through to people being annoyed by aircraft noise. That is one contributory factor to their health risks. It's one of many. I think for some people, they will feel particularly sensitive to it. If we look at the WHO systematic review that accompanied the 2018 guidance by Basner, he made a very important point that a lot of the statistical significance depends very much on whether you mention that it was aircraft noise in the question. So it shows that if people are associating the noise with aircraft, then they find it more annoying. If it is just the noise level itself, a lot of the significance drops away. So I think, of course, there is always going to be a proportion of the population who are upset by aircraft noise. They are already, and they will continue to be. I think this is where we, in EIA terms, look at the change. We've got no change in the noisiest aircraft. So, I think it's, to an extent, if you're not already seriously annoyed by aircraft noise, there's limited potential to become annoyed. I think I'm very great compassion for those who already feel very adversely affected by it, but the change due to the development is not considered to significantly increase that at a population level.
Okay, thank you. And then second question, and I don't know if you were watching in the first week where we had lots of local residents appear and talk, and one of the themes they raised was climate change, which we are going to be talking about, but there was a theme of fear, and again relating to the mental health point. Has the ES and ESA taken into account sort of climate change when looking at population health?
It has, yes. So one of the other sections that's in the ES health assessment is a section on climate change. This is clearly a very important issue. In great summary, the conclusions were that in EIA terms, in population health terms, the effects are not significant, and this largely reflects that whilst a very important issue, these are decisions that are made at a national level, and individual projects do not meaningfully contribute in a way that you would be able to trace through to changes in population health outcomes. We look to adopt this common methodology across all the topics so that we can, in a sense, put them side by side. So I certainly wouldn't want to downplay climate change in any way, but if one's looking at it with our very sort of technical focus of EIA and population health, the health effects are very, very small in terms of an individual project. This is very much where there's a joined up national strategy that addresses it. And indeed, you know, I advise on strategic levels assessments as well, and that's very much the arena in which those sorts of issues should and are addressed.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay.
Madam, I was just trying to find the page just as a cross-reference for you. If you give me a moment, I can probably find it. CE2, 52. I'd got to PDF page 50 and I was still scrolling. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's
okay.
helpful.
All right, well, we'll have a break now before we start cross-examination by Mr. Taylor. If we come back at 11:45, so we'll have 20 minutes. Okay, thank you. Okay, Mr. Piper. Yeah, excellent. Mr. Taylor.
Thank you very much. Mr. Piper, good morning. I'm suffering from the same problem that Mr. Humphreys has in terms of which screen I look at, although I'm less squeamish about looking in his direction than he seems to be in mine. But if I don't look at you, I'm not intending any rudeness by it. It's simply that the camera is that way for me, and the biggest screen in front of me is there. Can I begin, please, by asking you this? How many times have you visited the settlements around Bristol Airport?
In terms of doing this assessment, I haven't been on site. This is a desk-based assessment, as is normal.
Okay, thank you. Now, I want to just look briefly, if I may, at what has changed in terms of the circumstances since the officer's report was produced and the members took their decision. Clearly, we've got new forecasts of passenger demand, haven't we?
Yes.
Yeah, and we have a new assessment year of 2030.
Yes.
And we have new noise forecasts in terms of impact as well.
Yes.
We have in Mr. Williams's rebuttal for the first time the assessment of impact using the N70 and N60 indexes for 2030. Yes?
Yes.
And we have Mr. Williams's errata, which came in, I think, a couple of weeks ago, changing a suite of tables relating to nighttime impacts in the ESA. Yes?
Yes.
All right, thank you. We've also got new air quality forecasts for the 2030 assessment year, with and without, don't we?
Yes.
And we have a new socio-economic assessment in the ESA, again looking at 2030, with and without the development.
Yes.
And just to confirm, none of that information, none of it, was considered by Public Health England when they gave their consultation response predetermination.
That is correct, though does not change the health impact assessment, so I'd be very surprised if it changed their conclusions.
Right, okay, well, we can note your speculation there. Now, in terms of where you've got to in the ESA, the addendum to the environmental statement, in the light of all of those changes, if I could take you to CD 2.20.1, and in that document to page 128, please.
Yes.
We can see that the ESA updated this is the human health section in the updated addendum, and at 9.1.2 there are a number of factors which you took into account, including many of the things that I just itemised to you. Yes?
Yes.
And if we turn on, please, to page 131, we should get to paragraph 9.31. And here the update says that the scope of the assessment is restricted to reviewing the scope, methods, inputs and conclusions of the original ES in the light of the changes set out in 9.1.2, which we've just looked at. As with the original ES Health chapter, this addendum presents a qualitative analysis informed by the quantitative analysis in other topic areas, notably those listed in paragraph 9.1.1. So what you're explaining there is that just as with the previous assessment, the updated assessment presented here is a qualitative analysis.
That's correct, and
Yeah.
that's a valid methodology.
And it's informed by the quantitative analysis from the other topic areas and the conclusions reached in the addendum ES on those topic areas. Yes?
Yes, those are one of the inputs. So the outputs of the quantitative analyses feed into the health impact assessment, as we've gone through with methods, a wide range of other factors.
Yeah. So your judgment, as I understand it, or rather the judgment set out in the ESA in terms of health impacts, is founded upon the assessment of EIA significance within the topic areas that are relevant and listed at paragraph 9.1.1 in the addendum, yes?
Not quite. So it's informed by the outputs of those assessments, those quantitative assessments, their conclusions. So, for example, the socioeconomic chapter has major significant effects. That doesn't necessarily feed through to the health assessment having major significant effects. So we look at their data and their outputs, but not bound by their conclusions on significance.
Yes, I understand that you translate their assessment of EIA significance in their disciplines into an assessment of significance in terms of health impact.
We translate their data and their outputs to explain what the public health implication is in EIA significance terms. Okay.
Let's just move on, please, I think, to the next page, page 132 of the document that we've been looking at. And at 9.5.5, we get to a sort of summary of where the update drives you to. Broadly, you say the relationship between the with development and without scenarios remains the same as in the original ES. In other words, the proposed development would result in increased socioeconomic benefits for health and similar environmental exposures that incrementally increase health risk factors, the latter unlikely to be to a degree that would be discernible in terms of population outcomes. So
that's what it says.
Basically no change. Yeah?
No change to the conclusions, indeed.
Yeah. All right, thank you. Now, we can see there the reference to population health outcomes. I just want to explore that with you, if I may. Can we start, please, by looking at the NPPG at CD 20.67? And you went to this in your evidence in chief, and I want to take everybody to page 4 of the NPPG. And we went to the paragraph under the heading, how can the need for health facilities and other health and wellbeing impacts be considered in making planning policies and decisions? And I think you took us to the fact that it's helpful if the Director of Public Health is consulted on any planning applications that are likely to have significant impact on the health and well-being of the local population. And you drew from that this guidance is saying that you have to look at the population level. That was what you said, wasn't it?
It is saying that if you want to understand the health implications, then the go-to person is Public Health Director, and that's population health judgment.
Yeah. But let's finish reading the sentence in the way that you didn't when you referred to it in your evidence in chief. It says that are likely to have a significant impact on the health and well-being of the local population or particular groups within it. You see those words?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
yes, and that aligns very much with our vulnerable group population, subpopulation analysis.
Right. So you read all particular groups within it as referring to vulnerable groups, do you?
Groups within populations are subpopulations.
Right. Okay.
You could look at the groups that were less vulnerable. I mean, it all falls on a spectrum, but I don't think there would be particular merit in that.
Thank you. Now, let's just stay with this theme for a moment, if we may. And I'd like to take you to the APF, the Aviation Policy Framework that you went to, I think you took us to paragraph 5 in the executive summary. I want to take you to a different part of the document, if I may, to page 55 of the PDF. And this is chapter 3, Noise and Other Local Environmental Impacts. And at 3.1 we see this. Whilst the aviation industry brings significant benefits to the UK economy, there are costs associated with its local environmental impacts which are borne by those living around the airports. See, those living around airports, some of whom may not use the airport, will directly benefit from its operations. This chapter considers noise and air quality and other local environmental impacts. And then if we go on and we look at paragraph 3.3, for example, or 3.2, let's start at 3.2. The government recognises noise as the primary concern of local communities near airports. The extent to which noise is a source of tension between the airport and local communities will vary depending on a number of factors. We are aware that many airports already make considerable efforts to engage their local communities. And it says this: we want to strike a fair balance between the negative impacts of noise on health, amenity, quality of life and productivity, and the positive economic impacts of flights. And it goes on to say, as a general principle, the government therefore expects the future growth in aviation should ensure that the benefits are shared between the aviation industry and the local communities. So the local communities that are being referred to there are those living around the airports that are affected by noise, aren't they?
The local community, indeed,
Yeah.
and that's also
Yeah.
wider as well.
And what the government is seeking, as we can see, is a balance to be struck between the negative impacts of noise on those local communities and the positive economic impacts of flights.
I think there's the point to put before that on a fair balance, and if I may, there's a particular term we use for that in health and in health analysis, and that is equity. And I guess take you to CD 2065, which explains that, if that would be helpful.
Well, I'd quite like an answer to my question, Mr. Piper, if you wouldn't mind.
Sorry. There is a balance to be struck, and indeed, it does present the economic benefits, particularly on one side, and environmental harms on the other.
And that balance is a balance to be struck that includes health in terms of costs. And that health in this balance is the health of the population living around the airport, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so we're looking at striking a balance between the health impact of those living around the airport and the positive economic impacts of flights upon them. Fine, that's very helpful from my perspective. Let's, having looked at that, can we just move on, please, to look at how the core strategy looks at this particular issue in terms of health. I'd like to take you, if I may, to CD 5.6. Which is the North Somerset core strategy. And in that document, please, can we go to page 16 of the PDF?
Yes.
And at page 16, we've got the visions and objectives of the core strategy. And we can see that at 2.2 that it says the starting point is the North Somerset vision as set out in the Sustainable Community Strategy, which refers to, amongst other things, healthy, prosperous communities thriving in a quality environment. You see that?
I do.
And to help achieve that vision, the Sustainable Community Strategies developed 6 shared priorities, and the fourth of those is improving health and well-being. Yeah?
Yes.
And then we can see at paragraph 2.4 that the role of the core strategy and other planning documents is to provide the spatial land use expression of those shared priorities. So the core strategy includes policies, doesn't it, to achieve the objective of improving health and well-being?
Certainly does. There are other drivers, but yes.
Yeah. And when we go back in the core strategy to, if we go to PDF page 7, please, we can see the index of policies, and we've got policies bracketed under different sort of topic areas. And the fourth one down has a nice light blue colour, ensuring safe and healthy communities. So
See that?
we've got 3 policies, here's 25, 26 and 27. Those are the policies aimed at achieving that objective, aren't they, of improving health and well-being?
Those will all contribute to improving health and well-being, yes.
Okay. Can we turn please then to page 102 and look at policy CS26? This explains, under the heading Supporting Healthy Living and the Provision of Healthcare Facilities, the planning process will support programmes and strategies which increase and improve health services throughout the district, promote healthier lifestyles and aim to reduce health inequalities. This will be achieved through, and I just want to take you to the first of the criterion, requiring health impact assessments on all large-scale developments in the district that assess how the development will contribute to improving the health and well-being of the local population. So what this policy is saying is that it expects large-scale developments to go through the HIA process and to demonstrate that they contribute to improving the health and well-being of the local population. That's what it says, isn't it?
It says that. I think that it is important to note there that it's requiring a health impact assessment, which is exactly what we've done. I think we also have to think, what is a health impact assessment? I don't arrive at a project and I'm not given a final scheme to assess and that's the end of it. Health impact assessment is an iterative process. We start with a draft scheme and we improve it. And, absolutely my job is to improve it from the point of view of health and well-being. And that's exactly what we've done. So, implicit in all health impact assessment is that you are trying to make the situation better. And, I'll leave it to the policy teams to come as to exactly how we want to interpret this. But, the health impact assessment doesn't start out with the objective of these are the local policies and we're going to make sure we're in some way ticking boxes. We are there to improve health and well-being. And that is what health impact assessment does. And if we go to the explanatory points on the pages below, 3.320, we've got a bit of extra background on that. It's clear that health impact assessment is the tool by which you would assess how the development looks at improving health and well-being of the local population. And indeed, that is exactly what the health impact assessment has done. It's not the noise assessment in isolation that speaks to this policy. It's not the air quality assessment in isolation. It's the health assessment. And, further on, it's very clear. It looks at the benefits and the adverse effects. It looks at the potential health gains and the potential health risks, exactly as the health impact assessment has done. And we've been through the conclusions and the inspector can, weigh them up and consider what the overall balance is there.
Thank you. Now, before we leave CS26, I want to note the use of the words, the local population. You see that?
I do.
Now, reading that paragraph, it's talking about health impact on all large-scale developments and how the development will contribute to improving the health and well-being of the local population. That's the population local to the large-scale development, isn't it?
Yes, you'll recall we went through that, and the local population in the health impact assessment is defined in terms of the unitary authority, and within that we then go to a smaller site-specific population that's smaller than just the local population in order to make sure we're capturing those most proximal of effects.
Yes, we'll come on to what you've actually done in a bit, but let's just explore this a little bit further. Can I take you please to CD 217, which is the appeal decision notice. And I want to look at reason for refusal number 2 on the second page.
Yes.
And here we can see, it says the second reason for refusing the application was that the noise and impact on air quality generated by the increase in aircraft movements, and in particular the proposed lifting of seasonal restrictions on night flights, would have a significant adverse impact on the health and well-being of residents in local communities, and the proposed development would not contribute to improving the health and well-being of the local population, contrary to, and then it identifies a number of policies, including policy CS26 that we're looking at. So this reason for refusal is based upon an examination of the impacts on the local communities, the local population, i.e. those who live around the airport. Mr. Piper, that's the way one reads this, isn't it?
It says as it does, and those findings aren't consistent with what the health impact assessment is showing, what the public health team at the council have said, or what Public Health England have said.
Well, okay, that's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is that the policy requirement in the APF and in CS26 is that you have to assess the health impacts on the people living around the development, living around the airport concerned, and you have to look also, and when looking at those health impacts, you look at the impacts from noise, from air quality, all the other matters that you look at, and you look at the socio-economic benefits to them as well. But that, as I understand it, is not an exercise that you have done, Mr. Piper.
That is exactly the exercise we have done.
Great. Then we're going to have fun going through it in detail, and you can show me. Now, let's turn on from that, if I may, to look at some aspects of your methodology. We spent a lot of time this morning on that. I'm sorry to have to take everybody back to it, but I do need to. Now, I think the starting point for this is CD 2.5.6, which is the ES's methodological chapter. So the original ES, CD 2.5.6, it's the approach to preparing the environmental statement. And this is the chapter that sets out how the EIA process is undertaken in the environmental statement. If we turn please to page 7. At 4714, we're in the section on significance evaluation. And at 4714, the ES says that in applying the approach to significant evaluation, it's necessary to ensure there's consistency between each environmental topic and the level at which effects are considered to be significant. Therefore, it's inappropriate for the assessment of one topic to conclude that minor effects are significant, when with another topic, only comparative major effects are significant. So, just so that I can understand it, that the level at which effects are significant in your assessment of the population level. Yes?
That is correct.
Right, and so on that basis we would expect, as a result of 4714, all the significance evaluation in the environmental statement to be done on a population basis, so that there's consistency between your health chapter and all the others.
No, not at all. I
No?
mean, the EIA is a collection of different assessments that have their own discrete methodologies, which indeed is why each has a methods chapter. I can speak to the health methods.
Yeah.
And
because the fact of the matter is, Mr. Piper, that the other topic sections in the ES do not consider impacts on a population level, do they? It's only the health impact section that does that.
well, I think I've explained clearly that is what the health assessment adds. That is why it is included.
All right. Now let's move on to the next paragraph, 4715. It says conclusions about significance arrived at using the following: professional judgment, available information on magnitude and other characteristics of potential changes expected to be caused by the proposed development, receptor sensitivity of these changes, the value of the receptor, and the effect of these changes on relevant receptors. So we can see that those are generally what feeds into conclusions on significance. And we've got, if we look a bit further down at 4718, some evaluation matrices that take into account some of those factors. So we've got receptor sensitivity, we've got magnitude of change, and we can see that the rationale for sensitivity is provided in each topic chapter, including chapter 16. And then we get on to determination of significance, which is how you draw all the factors together. And we see that there's a reference to using a matrix, table 4.1, and we can see that if we scroll down a bit further on page 9. Now, I think I'm right in saying that you don't use that significant evaluation matrix, do you?
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. And thank you. The ES says at 4.7.24 that variations to the approach on assessing significance which may be applicable to specific environmental topics are detailed in the relevant significance evaluation methodology subsection contained in each topic chapter. So we can expect then, when we turn to the chapter on health in the ES, to see the explanation of how significance is evaluated, can't we?
We can.
And so let's just look at CD 2.5.42, which is the relevant document. I'm just going to find it myself now. Yeah. And can we turn in that, please, to page 22, the PDF. At 16.9, we've got assessment methodology. We can see that the generic project-wide approach is set out, but whilst that's informed the approach, it's necessary to set out how it's been applied and adapted. And we can see, as we go down through, if we go to 16.9.12, you come to significance, and it's explained that a determination of significance is required, and we can see at 16.9.15 there are two stages that you've adopted. First, the sensitivity of the receptor affected and the magnitude of the effect upon it are characterised. and that establishes whether there's a relevant population, whether there is a relevant population and a relevant change in the health outcomes to consider. And secondly, a professional judgment is made as to whether or not the change in a population's health is significant. And you helpfully set out at 16.7 the factors that you've taken into account in looking at the issues relating to sensitivity. We can see there, can't we, that you've looked at inequalities, deprivation, health status, life stage and outlook. Now, can I just take you to CD 2065, please, which we spent some time looking at. And that is the guidance that came out after, I think, the publication of the ES, and just want to follow this through, because as I understand it, your approach to significance in the ESA didn't change. That you still use when you're looking at sensitivity, still use those same 6 criteria from table 16.7. That's right, isn't it?
Those are the criteria for sensitivity. That's part of it, yes. Okay.
So if we look at 2065 and we look at page 83, well, actually let's start at page 82, the very bottom. There's table C1, which refers to the factors to take into account when defining sensitivity. Page 82 of CD 2065. We can see life stage, that's in your 16.7, deprivation, that's in it, health status is in it, daily activities. Similar to health status, the ability of people to form day-to-day activities is relevant to their sensitivity, particularly when there are changes to access to services or community amenities. If not part of routine statistics, this can be professional judgment. Consider the extent to which people affected are particularly reliant upon access to health service facilities or staff resources. That's not in the list, is it, in table 16.7, has not been considered for the purposes of assessing sensitivity?
It's not in the table. I mean, it's one of the Office of National Statistics health metrics that's done for the census in the UK. So if one was applying that, we'll probably find that in the health appendix.
Would that capture things like your activity of, say, enjoying your garden?
No, that's a metric that looks at, so it relates to the population group who already have poor health, and it's to do with day-to-day functioning and ability to carry out tasks. Okay.
Now, the other one I want to draw attention to is the capacity to adapt. That's not in your list to take into account when assessing sensitivity either, Mr. Piper, is it?
No, that's not in the list there.
So, in terms of your evidence, well, let's just go on and look at magnitude before I ask that question. I want to do the same exercise, please. If we go back to table 16.8 in CD 2.5.42, it's on page 26. Across the top, we've got 5 factors taken into account in characterising magnitude: severity, extent, frequency, reversibility, and exposure. And then if we go back to the document that we were just looking at, and we scroll on to table C2, terms to define magnitude, on page 84, we can see that duration is not something that you've taken into account when looking at magnitude. You see that?
Yes, no, that's fine. Yes.
Yeah. So the duration is the length of time an effect occurs and is apparently a key consideration for health, and that's not a factor that you've taken into account in assessing magnitude in your, by reference to your method set out in table 16.8. That's right, isn't it?
That is correct, and I think I explained it's something of a summary, but yes, there are a few more factors that are in the long list,
So,
in the full methods.
So just by way of example as to how this might affect things, we know that there are a number of houses that are affected by day and by night by noise levels above the significant observed adverse effect level thresholds, don't we?
Is the case?
Now, my understanding is that there's no identification in the environmental statement or Mr. Williams's proof of whether the houses which are above the soil level by day are the same ones affected by night. Are you aware of anything that identifies that particular consideration?
I'm not. I would expect them to be very geographically related, given that the common source is aircraft taking off from the airport.
But your assessment, for example, because it doesn't look at duration, doesn't take into account whether those people are affected effectively 24/7 by noise levels above significant observed adverse effect levels, does it?
Well, I think one has to be fair that in applying these methods, one is looking at the whole process. Maybe we haven't listed out every single criteria here, but that doesn't mean I would deliberately ignore a relevant factor.
No, it just means that factor wasn't taken into account. And because it wasn't taken into account, because we've seen factors were left out for sensitivity and magnitude, the appraisal process, the methodology in the environmental statement and the ESA is not consistent with the guidance which is set out in CD 20.65. That's right, isn't it?
I disagree with that. I mean, I think these are highly aligned methodologies. One goes into more detail than the other. We could point out numerous points. There's a very long method statement in the reference paper about all the things that don't also appear in the ES methods. This is an explanation for the audience of what I do in the assessment, and the level of detail in that doesn't change the number of factors and the way I apply methods in undertaking health impact assessment.
Okay, well, I put the points I need to put on that aspect of your methodology. Some other aspects that I've been having trouble with, perhaps you can help me with. When we look at the way in which you've set out your criteria for sensitivity at 16.9.16 of CD 2.5.42 on page 25. I was trying to understand the categories that you adopt for sensitivity, because they're different from the ones generally used in the ES. You've got a scoring of high, medium, low or negligible sensitivity. So there's a 4-point scale, yeah?
Yes.
And then if we look at your table 16.7, we've got the 5 aspects that you've looked at there, and we've got two rows, higher sensitivity and lower sensitivity, yeah?
That's correct.
Now, those describe different factors for higher or lower sensitivity, but what I don't understand and don't see anywhere is an explanation of what constitutes medium as opposed to what constitutes large, why small is different from medium. In other words, how you reach the judgments you've reached about sensitivity. We've just got higher or lower and five 5 criteria across the top. You see my point? So
I do, and
so where
happy
do
to
I
explain.
find in your methodology an explanation of the gradations between large down to negligible, high down to negligible in terms of sensitivity?
Deliberately, you do not, because this is precisely why we're departing from a matrix approach, which is, as we've looked at, that overarching EIA methodology and as explained in the reference paper for health issues, really we're talking about a narrative discussion that explains the evidence in context, and to pull it into a matrix of definitive statements actually is more misleading than trying to present it as I have, as something of a continuum. And I think, as I say at paragraph 16.9.16 and 17, this is it's instructive positions on a spectrum that also includes more extreme as well as intermediate positions.
All right.
I think all these factors have a range, and you have to consider the factors as a whole and present a professional opinion on them.
Okay, now in relation to magnitude, your scale, we can see from 16.9.17, goes from large, medium, small or negligible. And we've got another table for magnitude, 16.8, and it's got smaller magnitude, larger magnitude. And again, we've got no guidance as to how you differentiate between any gradation on your scale from that table, have we? We can't tell why something would be medium and something small, or why something would be small or negligible.
Well, we don't in that table. I mean, this is an area that at the time of writing it indeed was developing, and if we want to look at the reference paper, it perhaps gives you more granularity on what you're asking for in the figures that accompany the tables we've quoted, which do start to set out, but deliberately not as a matrix, the relationship between these criteria and indicative positions on them.
Okay.
Very happy to go through that if you want to.
I'll come on to that in a moment, if I may. Just stick with me within the environmental statement for a moment. We can see, if we go on to the next part, the judgment framework for significance at 16.9.19, what we see there is that having established magnitude and sensitivity, whether there's a relevant population to consider an irrelevant change in health outcome, judgment has to be made as to whether or not the change in a population's health is significant. And the approach uses a framework, and we can see that at 16.9.21 there are guide questions that are set out that are used to inform the professional judgment on significance, and we can see what those are. Yeah?
We can.
Now, in terms of scientific literature, there's a number of questions that are asked. I just want to explore that in the context of CD 2065, if I may. And I just want to take us, I think, to page 86 of that document. Yes. 86 is figure C3, the health significance conceptual model. And we've got a nice wheel with the colours changing from green to a dark blue in the centre. On the left-hand side, at about sort of northwest, we can see scientific literature. And we can see gradations going down from unsupported relationship, suggestive relationship, clear, causal. So there's a judgment to be made as to which of those categories one falls in when thinking about scientific literature. Yes?
That is the case, yes.
Right. Now, afraid we're having to jump around a bit, but if you wouldn't mind coming with me back into the environmental statement, CD 2.5.42, and turning to page 32. Here we're in the section on construction, noise and vibration. I'm just using this as an example. At 1610.24 we see a reference to the scientific literature summarised. The literature predominantly relates to transport-related noise exposure. While literature supports there being thresholds at which effects are likely, it also acknowledges the subjective nature of response. In this regard, noise effects can be considered to have non-threshold effects. The assessment has had regard to the population groups identified in the literature. What we don't see anywhere is a placing of the scientific literature considerations on any sort of scale, do we?
We don't.
Right.
We have statements that there is sufficient high quality studies to support an association. So, you know, we're certainly in the ballpark of clear association, I would say, on if we were looking at the wheel.
And if we go through the environmental statement for the scientific literature consideration under each topic, we will not find that being placed on any scale anywhere in Chapter 16 of the ES, and the same was not done in the addendum ES. There's just no scale applied.
Well, the guide questions are presented there.
Am I right?
There isn't a scale.
Yeah. And if we
presented
do
in
that,
this ES,
if we do that
ES
for,
methodology.
sorry, I think I spoke over you, Mr. Piper. Forgive me. What were you saying?
Sorry, it might be the line. Yes, no, there's no scale within the ES methodology.
Right. And indeed, there's no scale for any of these considerations to the guide questions applied at all in any of the sections or topics addressed in the environmental statement, is there?
Well, you'll see in each case it refers back to the guide questions, which you know have something of an implicit scale in them, and that's mapped out in more detail in the reference paper. You took us to figure C-3. If you scroll down from that, you get table C-3, where you'll find those same guide questions and a few more.
So just
which relates this.
To draw it all together, we've got no explanation of how you reach your judgments on your scale of sensitivity, no explanation as to how you form your judgments on your scale of magnitude, and there's no explanation of the scale you've adopted in applying the guidelines. It's impossible, isn't it, from the environmental statement to understand how you have reached the judgments you have reached as to significance, Mr. Piper. Impossible.
I would level that at all professional judgments. I think that is why we go to some lengths to try and present a methodology within the limited space we're given within an EIA. We've got a reference paper here that absolutely speaks to that and has set it out in great detail, so that perhaps we don't need to keep trying to squeeze it into our short ES methods chapters. But you know, I'm very confident in the methods that have been applied, and I'm sorry if they're insufficiently transparent within the ES itself.
Right, thank you. Now, in terms of noise, let's turn and look at noise and the way in which noise has been considered in the health assessment. We know that we've got the concepts from the national the noise policy statement for England, which creates the concepts of Lowell and Sol, and of course Lowell, the lowest observed adverse effect level, is the threshold at which health effects begin to be experienced by humans.
Yes, if you had a population at the lull, you would be expecting to find some health effects there. Of course, as we know, that threshold is somewhat arbitrary in that you get effects above it and below it.
Okay. Now, I want to take you to CD 220.1, which is the addendum to the environmental statement. And I think I need to go to, I lost it myself now, hang on. Yes, the main report of the ESA, and I want to go to page 134 in that document. And to paragraph 9.5.23. And here, having looked at the data produced in the update, the conclusion is reached that the overall picture for air noise is of similar and reducing numbers of dwellings being affected by elevated nighttime noise levels. So we can all see that the basis on which the health impact has been assessed is an overall picture for air noise of similar or reducing numbers of dwellings being affected by elevated nighttime noise levels. And the same trend is said to apply to daytime noise. So, am I right to think that on that basis, you've not advised Bristol Airport Limited to introduce any changes to its existing noise mitigation scheme?
Well, noise mitigation is something, as I've said, in the iterative nature of EIA that's discussed all the way through. You'll see some references in the ES chapter to additional mitigation that the health chapter recommends, even with not significant effects. So no, we've continued to push for mitigation to the point we can. I think we have to remember that we're operating within the EIA regulations, and I forget exactly, but maybe it's Schedule 4, as to what's in an EIA. The mitigation is focused to the likely significant effects, and where there aren't significant effects, there is less need to push for mitigation.
So, just so I understand it, what specific changes to the noise mitigation scheme have you sought from Bristol Airport Limited?
Well, we can look in the ES. It's at the end of the assessment, but it was factors like the double glazing, the ventilation, making sure we're looking at that whole internal environment,
yes.
not just as insulation. We had some points around the school as well, and the noise insulation, internal classroom measures that could be something that is done as well, and we'd welcome that from a public health point of view. So, I leave the detail of the contours and the quote accounts. That's outside my specialism. I don't have the noise technical qualifications to be talking in those details.
All right. Well, let me just make sure that we're looking at noise from the same basis, if I may. Have you got access to Mr. Williams's proof of evidence, please?
I'm sure I can.
I want to start looking at page 46, please.
Sorry, just give me a moment.
Certainly.
Okay, page 46.
Yes. And here he sets out a summary of the daytime assessment on the number of dwellings above Lowell and above Seoul. If we start, please, by looking at Lowell, we can see that there are 3,250 dwellings above Lowell in 2017, which, if permission were refused, would reduce to 2,600 dwellings, a difference of 650. You see that?
Reducing from
3,250 down to 2,600 at the very bottom row. That's a reduction of 650 dwellings.
Are we in 2030?
Yes.
In table 6.
Indeed.
I've got a reduction from 3,100 to, is that the right one, to 2,600?
I'll try again and make my comparison clearer. If we start at 2017, the top row, 3,250.
Oh, right, yes,
Yeah.
okay.
And then we compare that with 10 MPPA 2030, the bottom row, 2,600. That's a reduction of 650.
Okay, yes, we're not on like-for-like gears, but yes, I understand.
And if we look at the 12 MPPA 2030 case, the next row up, it's 3,100. So we can see that the difference between granting permission and not is 500 houses appearing to be above the daytime Lowell level.
Yes.
Yeah. And if we just stick with looking at daytime levels for the moment, and turn the page to page 48. Here, Mr. Williams presents data on his forecast of the population highly annoyed. And we can see, doing the same exercise, 2017, 750, it drops to 600 people if permission is refused. That's a drop of 150. It drops by 50 if permission is granted to 700. So the impact of the scheme is 100 people, more people being highly annoyed by the aircraft noise. Yes?
That is correct.
Right. Thank you. And if we can take you away from Mr. Williams's proof and into his rebuttal. I'd like to take us to page 6 of Mr. Williams's rebuttal.
Yes.
We've got here, he's using the N70 index, so he's looking at the number of dwellings exposed to events above 70 dB LAS max per day. So this is a maximum sound level and the number of events. If we look at the 100 column, so these are people who are exposed to 100 up to 199 events above 70 dB LAS max per day. In 2017, we've got 20 of those people. And in 2030, with the 10 MPPA case, we've got 20. But with the 12 MPPA case, we've got 500. So this is number of dwellings, I should say, not people. I keep making the same mistake Mr. Humphreys keeps making too. We're all doing it. 480 dwellings. Now, multiply that by 2.3, and one has 1,104 people in a property experiencing 100 to 199 events above 70 dBLS max outside. We've already explored in this inquiry the potential for noise levels like that to interfere with conversation and telephone calls if your window is open, and the consequences of having to close it. We've also discussed the ability to enjoy one's garden. To what extent have you had regard to the impact on those 1,104 people in your assessment, Mr. Piper? Because I can't see any reference to N70 anywhere.
No, you won't find that in the ES or the ESA, except to note that both assessments look at the whole of the respective noise chapters. So when we're doing the assessment, we're looking at those matrix, those metrics that are indicative of what population health effect is. We've talked at some length in the inquiry about the ones we focus on in terms of the sols and the lols, and then at the supplementary indicators that again help us to give context to that and to understand it.
Well, just
I've also noted that we focus on the nighttime noise. That is where the public health effect is greatest, and indeed, you know, if that wasn't the case, I'm sure we would have been pulled up on that point by Public Health England. That is not the case. So yes, no, we have looked at daytime noise. We have not explained our conclusions in the same detail as nighttime noise, but in looking at the population health effects, this is our conclusion.
if I had to stay in my house with my windows shut during the day, and I couldn't enjoy my garden because I'm experiencing noise levels of 70 dBLA max 100 to 199 times during the day, do you think I'd be pretty stressed, Mr. Piper? Would that cause me stress, or would it be something I could just live with?
I think there's going to be variable reactions between individuals across the population. I think we have to remember we're in the context of the change of an existing airport. I think maybe something that, as Mr. Fimicelli's noted, all these different metrics have their limitations. I think when we're looking at these N60s and N70s, these categories that we jump between 50 and 100 and 100 to 200, these are big leaps. You perhaps have slight artifacts in the data as to what really the picture is, and that's why we're looking not just at N60, N70, but we're looking at what is this overall change in noise. It's a very small change in noise relatively. We're thinking about the number of aircraft changes, particularly at night. These are not big increases in the number of aircraft movements. So we have to look at it all in the round. And of course, as I go back to my evidence in chief, huge compassion for the people who are currently and will continue to be adversely affected. But I'm taking a step back. It's a technical population level assessment of explaining the implications for everyone who wants to look at this development and the inspectors, that if we look at this in terms of are we also putting a population at risk, then the case is no, we're not. These are of course going to be effects that individuals will feel very personally, but we are not looking at that within this assessment, and we must remember, these calculations, these are somewhat mathematical calculations based on assumed averages. I think this isn't an indication that there will indeed be this number of people who experience these effects. I'm sure we'll go on to talk about night noise, and there particularly, we've talked about the noise insulation scheme and the role that will have. So I think I take your point, but I also want to note the context around it.
Okay. Let's, just before we move on too far, I took you to the table which identified 500 dwellings above Lowell in the daytime as a result of the development getting permission. That's just so we can record the number. 500 multiplied by 2.3 is 1,150 people in those dwellings above Lowell. Before we leave the picture in relation to Lowell, I just want to look at where we get to at night, and we need to, again, I'm afraid, look at Mr. Williams's proof, and this time we need to turn to page 49. And if we look at the picture there, we can see it's the same exercise, similar table. Hopefully I'll explain it more clearly this time. Starting at 2017 row, we've got 3,750 dwellings that would fall by 350 to 3,400 if permission is refused. But it increases by 250 if permission is granted compared to 2017. And the difference between the with and without case is some 600 dwellings on that basis. So that's,
I can see that.
Multiply that by 2.3, that's 1,380 people coming into the nighttime lull, or being in the nighttime, above the nighttime lull threshold. We've also got, of course, the tables that Mr. Williams produced in his errata, which shows that those people experience an increase in the noise that they experience. It's not just
we do. We're still in very small increment changes, but yes.
It's not just people who are in the lull for the first time that's included in that number. It's people who are there already, and the noise levels they're exposed to increase. Now, just taking this a bit further, can I take you, please, to page 52 of Mr. Williams's proof, where he looks at the population that's highly sleep disturbed. Here we've got 450 highly sleep disturbed in 2017, reducing by 50 to 400 if permission is refused, increasing by 50 if permission is granted from 2017, and a difference of 100 people. So that's
correct.
What Mr. Williams identifies.
And I think we have to, if we're being fair to looking at our 2017, we're not far off that, and this again is a mathematical calculation of averages. It's also, the ES looks at the worst case. We've got 2030 here. Certainly effects are likely to decline beyond that. Not take into account the mitigation scheme here. I think that's likely to be an effective mitigation in this case.
So let's just see what you say about impacts of those affected at the Lowell level, so between Lowell and Seoul. Page 32 of your proof, paragraph 4.4.19, please. You say, in relation to noise, for those affected at the Lowell, particularly at night, the incremental effect to a larger number of people is in population health terms not negligible, but equally given the very small change and the many other sources contributing to the local soundscape, it continues to be considered as not a significant project level effect. And that's your conclusion. that the thousands of people that we've identified from Mr. Williams' own evidence going above the low level at which you have agreed there are health effects, those consequences are not a significant project level effect?
Not quite. The people above the LOL do not experience a health effect. They experience a very small change in the risk factors for a health effect. And those are, particularly low in relation to LOL compared to SOL. So looking across a population, we'll look at the groups that are likely to be vulnerable within that, which would be a subset, and then those exposed to that risk, again, a further subset and further subset for those that are likely to actually experience a change in health outcomes. So yes, in population health terms, this isn't a significant EIA health effect. We've certainly looked at it. So have the Council's public health team, so have Public Health England.
So the 1,104 people in the 480 houses exposed to 100 to 270 decibel LA maxes a day, they don't experience any health consequence from the development at all. That's your evidence.
My evidence is that it won't be a significant population health effect.
Right. So
we're looking at the relative risk change to a small minority.
So they will experience health effects?
They will experience an effect from the noise. For a small proportion of their people, that will change their risk factors for health outcomes. So for a small proportion, there is the potential for adverse health effects. And I've been clear throughout my proof that this is a consequence of all development.
See, I'm asking you questions about those people because the data that I took you to in the rebuttal proof was produced for the first time in the rebuttal proof. It's the first time we had an N70 for 2030. And so Public Health England haven't seen that data. It's not assessed in the environmental statement, and it's not assessed in the environmental statement addendum. So this is the first opportunity we've got, and I've got on behalf of the Council, to put these points to you. I can't see anywhere in your assessment in the ES, the ESA, or your proof where you examine the impact of the development upon these individuals by reference to the N70 index. It's just not done, is it?
No, you'll see the N60, I think, we look at because we focus on nighttime noise. You won't see N70 there, I agree.
Right, thank you. Right. Thank you. I think that's probably a good moment to stop, actually.
Okay, thank you.
I've still got more questions, just to be clear.
Yes, no. How long after lunch do you think?
I'm not sure.
We're about an hour and 15 in.
I know.
So.
I'm not doing as well as I'd hoped, I'm afraid.
Okay. Okay. Well, we'll have an hour for lunch. We'll come back at 2 o'clock where we'll continue. Okay, thank you.